I see that there's some people yet to join, so I'll give a couple of minutes for people to trickle in, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we are good. So, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on our Lunch and Learn session this Tuesday. We use this forum to talk to our customers to help them fix their quick problems and also kind of demo something that kind of gives a good learning for everyone who joins the call. And I'm Akshay from Decisions. I work for the civil engineering team here, and I'll be your host today. So throughout this session, feel free to use the chat option to kind of ask your questions if you have. And if there are no questions, I'll be taking you through a demonstration of one of the rule types that we have in Decisions, and we call that rule sets. So we will look at that and also answer some of your questions that we'll get in the chat. So with that stage set, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into my Decision Studio and start looking at the questions that we have.
Hi, Akshay. Good morning. Vineet here.
Hey, hi, Vineet.
Yeah. So, Akshay, I have some form, and
Okay.
form is basically a HTML form.
Okay.
Form is there, and I wanted to run some JavaScript on top of that.
Okay.
So, how to attach the JavaScript? How to run those any JavaScript so I can replicate the things.
Hmm. So are you running that form as embedded on your end, or is that something that's running on Decisions portal?
Okay, so I have designed this form in Decisions.
Okay.
And there is something like if I wanted to uh, do some CSS changes through the JavaScript,
Mm-hmm.
like on click, if I wanted to do some CSS changes on that. So, or whatever the DOM element is there, I wanted to capture those things. So those kind of work I wanted to do with the JavaScript.
Okay. So let's see. So how you would be using that form? Like, will you be using as a portal, or will that be embedded as an iframe to some application that you have?
It's basically for me, um, it's a kind of the multi-tab form.
Okay. Yes.
So
So.
on that, I wanted to have
Mhm.
the details, whatever there in the form. So I wanted to capture those details using JavaScript, and based on
Okay.
that, later I will have those information into the PDF.
Okay. So let's look actually, because I have not used JavaScript on the forms. Usually, uh, thing that we are trying to do, it could be validation on the data or validation of the rules. So I typically using our active form flows and also the legacy data flows and visibility rules, as you see on the right. So that's how typically I go ahead with that. So may I understand what is that you're trying to solve in this case, Vineet? For example, what's the use case that you have where you have a need to capture the data through JavaScript?
Correct.
I mean, we do have this folder, which I have not used. Maybe once you create those controls, they would be available uh, in this section of JavaScript controls. So have you already created something, or you're yet to do that at the
Uh,
JavaScript?
okay. So JavaScript I worked upon, but here
Mm-hmm.
how to attach it, like on click, how my
Mm-hmm.
JavaScript function will call. So those things are a little challenging here for me.
Okay. Okay, so I think Amber from one of my coworker actually shared a link, and let me actually click on that and see. Can you still see my screen, Vinay?
Yes, I can able to see.
So yeah, so this is the documentation that Amber just shared, and this helps in creating JavaScript form controls. And I think this should take you step by step into what you're trying to do. And I think what you questioned is something very similar to this, right? JavaScript controls may contain the input and the outputs which you would want to use. So have you gone through this documentation already, Vineet?
No, I haven't gone through this.
Oh, okay. Okay. I think that would be the perfect starting point for you, because what I'm seeing is you will create that JavaScript here, whatever the function that you want to do, right? And then save it as .js. And then how you would import that is, I was showing you that form where there's a folder that kind of shows you all the JavaScripts that you have written. So that's how I think you would add them. You would go into forms, click on add action, and then attach your JavaScript here. So when you do that, what happens is, as I was showing, that it will be available here in the JavaScript controls.
Okay.
Yeah. And this kind of tells you, all a lot of different things that you can do using JavaScript. It looks like a good elaborative documentation here.
Sure, Akshay.
So yeah, so in short, if I have to just sum up your solution, what you would do is you would click on create form, and when you do that, it gives you different options, right? You can click form and you start building it. What you would do is you will click on JavaScript control, and then you would click on add action control, and then you would provide the information about that step, and then you would upload that JavaScript file, right?
Okay.
And then you'll go ahead and save that. And when that will be saved, and when you go into your actual form, scroll down to the JavaScript controls, and it would be available here. I hope that helps, Vinny. Does that help, Vinny? Okay.
Yeah, sure, Akshay. So I'll go through this. If I have any challenge, I'll come back.
Yeah, perfect. And I'm not sure if you have the access to the chat. If you have, there's a link to that documentation which we just went through.
Yeah, I have seen it. I have clicked on that link. I'll go through that.
Okay, sure. Perfect. Awesome.
Thank you, Akshay.
So yeah, no worries, Vinny. So okay, let's move on. And I see that one we have from Tim Halton. Hi, Tim. We are running into code bucket. Yeah, I can hear you. I'm just reading through the question that you just shared with us. I'm just going through that real quick.
I can explain a little more if you'd like as well, because any new data structure or element we add to an existing data structure will not compile in our production environment. Usually we get that message on the right, those messages on the right, like code compiled successfully, but we're getting the that code bucket I'm unable to compile. Like in the event viewer, I can see a CSL client console as a category, like error, server timeout, elapse without receiving a message from the server. And I know in the past we submitted a ticket, this being due to a data structure that was created, being the name being too long.
Okay.
But I was not sure if there's a way that I could track that. I've been looking in the query editor, seeing if there's a way. And again, I guess, do you know by chance off the top of your head what that limit is? I remember it was told a while back, but I can't for the life of me remember.
Yeah, I don't really recall that. And I'm not sure if it gives it runtime validation if I take something that's way too large. Okay.
Because again, we would expect a validation error.
Yeah, so here you see the namespace name
Right.
should not exceed more than 128 characters. So how long is your name for the data structure?
Again, this is our production environment, so it's we have tons of data structures. That's why I'm trying to
Okay.
see if there's a way I can
To
track
find out which data
which
structure is having this
structure might
issue.
be causing
Okay.
the issue.
Got it. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I think we got a part of the question answered. So it's going to be max 128 characters, right? So let's close this.
How many
And
was that?
128 characters.
128. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So what I'll do is I'll go into one of our system tools. I go to system, then I click on administration. Then inside administration, I have system tools. And then I'm going to click on event viewer. So here, if you see, this is the event viewer that kind of captures any sort of error that you would have, come across.
Correct.
But on the top, you will also see there are some other reports also that
I've been looking at the code compile results as well.
Okay. Okay, so you have already done
and
that.
I can see as of 5/23 yesterday, we're getting errors. Assembly was not generated. The last one that went through successfully was 5/18.
Okay, and you're not able to get which data structure that was, basically.
I am not. I'm not sure how to track that, to be honest.
If you see, when I click on more, you will see there are several other reports also. And I think you clicked on the maybe code buckets, but we do have one for data structure status. So let's actually click on that and see what it gives us.
And I didn't see anything where it was like fail, pass or fail or anything, because I did go through this as well.
Okay.
Well, I do see loaded for a lot of states, and I do see a lot of ours don't have loaded. But again, those are ones that were created like a year ago. And this issue started maybe last Friday from what our business analysts reported.
Okay. So, I mean, these are the different types that we have. And as you can see, the state has loaded, which I'm assuming that it kind of says that they have succeeded. But when I click on gear icon, I can also see and add more fields to this report if that helps.
And we can create the data structure and we could see the saved like entities, but we can't like reference them in a flow. It's like it doesn't exist, essentially. It's like it never compiles. It's kind of what we're running into. I've been trying to run a query against like the flow execution data structures and our defined data structures using a length field against the data type full name to see if it matches 128. I haven't seen any yet, but I wasn't sure of the limit. So now with that, maybe I can kind of go through and see if there are any out there. And I have submitted a ticket on this. I just thought there might be a way I can kind of track it myself if possible.
So I think one is that you can definitely see if there's any data structure going more than 128 characters. But I think in this report, we do get the table name as well, if you see. So what this table name would do is essentially mention the name of the data structure if you're not able to capture it from the default report, because right now I'm just editing the default report, which we just saw, right? Because when I click on add, I can have, when this was last modified, when it was deleted, and I can also put some filters if I want to just see what I want to see, because this actually shows you all the things that have been created in that instance. So I just added this table name because it usually creates a table at the back end where it essentially stores the data that we are generating. So there I can see the different names on the data structures that I have and where they are used. So maybe some investigation on this report can help you, Tom.
I'll take a look at that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. But good to know that you had already, came this far. I mean, all these reports, because they're a little hidden here.
Yeah.
Yeah. There. Okay. default so that you can see one line. Yeah, so, okay, so we'll move to the next question. I think this is from Mansoor. Mansoor. Yeah, so the question is there a way to have data repeater row always defaulted to the user so that they can see one row? Yeah, that can be done. So how you would do it is inside the flow where you are using that form, you would be essentially passing a value there, which can be a constant. And then when you load that form, it'll actually come with that one line. And then the users can add more if they want to, but they would always be that default value.
No, I was wondering, so like I can add that into it, like the default columns, but I can't add like the whole line. Is there a way like you can?
When you say the whole line, you mean the row, right?
Yes, the whole row with like all the fields. I have like 7 fields. I just want one whole like row completely always like defaulted. Like be there.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. Actually, let me pull up something that I have built for this. Okay, so this is a form that kind of use this data repeater. And when this flow is run, so it kind of picks some values by default, right? So you can have one row populated, or you can have several rows populated. The first thing is, I think you have already done that. You need to have this this data repeater. That's number one, right? And I think you have already defined that. Is that correct, Mansoor? You are past that step, right?
Yes, I have. I have already completed data repeater and everything.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. Then we move into the main form, and then let's see if we have any settings here that have been configured. If not, because I'm sure that it usually happens inside the actual flow. This is the flow where we're using it. And let's look at some things here. List of timesheet entries. And I think this is the data repeater that we're talking about. And let me actually make sure that you're looking at timesheet, list of timesheet entries. You see here, this would be the name for your data repeater, because this is essentially the variable in which you would be passing that row when the flow runs, right? Yes. So what's happening here is, you see, I have not kept it ignored. Now, if I keep it ignored, and when the user comes in and open that form, they would not see anything, because it would be the starting point for them to add that row and then start populating it. But in this case, you see, we are passing this list of timesheet entries. So what happens here is, Mansoor, look at like as a list. Your data repeater is basically a list. So in your case, you'll be passing the first item of that list by mapping it here. And the next question you would see is, how do I get that list? So that list is something which you will be creating in your flow. So for example, in this case, we would be getting that from somewhere, list of timesheet entries. Let's see where we're getting it from. List of timesheet entries. So this is where it's being used in this form. And we must be getting it from somewhere. Let's check. List of items. But in this case, we may be getting that from an external system. But what you would do is you can just create data. And in this data, you would actually define, let's say, default value. I'll say default rows. And what you would do is you would define that data repeater type here, Mansoor, right? And then you actually make it a list. So what will happen is you will get that data structure. And here you can actually build that row. I mean, do you want me to go ahead and build something for you? I mean, let me do that.
That would be great if it's quick. Thank you.
I mean, I'm just trying to give you an example here. So in your case, I'm just using it as a string, but in your case here, you would actually be using the name of your data structure, right? Whatever that is.
Oh, okay, gotcha. That makes sense. So like I have a separate data structure. Okay, that's perfect. Thank you.
This will be the data structure of your data repeater, basically, nothing else, because we would want to store or create a list that is just as the data repeater data type. So I mentioned that type here, I click that it is a list, and then I save that. Now what will happen is it'll give me an option. So what I'll do is I'll actually build array. Now I can define item 1, I can add item 2 and other things. So it'll depend, how many default values you would want to pass in that data repeater. In your case, I think it would just be 1. So you would create that item, and then click on, whatever that value you would want to populate. And once that is done, you get this default row as the output. And on the form, when you see this input as list of timesheets here, so I would actually map this to this default row. Does that make sense?
Yes, quick question. Like sometimes when you see, like when you go from select from flow in your form, and it usually shows the list of timesheet entries, because I have that has in my main data structure too, but then sometimes it doesn't. Like, do you know why is there a reason that sometimes it shows up from select from flow and sometimes doesn't?
You mean the value you want to map or the data structure?
The data structure that I use for the data repeater.
It will actually show up here. I mean, you see that for this example here, the data structure name is timesheet tracker. So it's giving me this option here. And when you click on select from flow, and if you don't see any output or input in here, that's of the type timesheet entries, that means you have not defined that value here. It's gonna start from fresh. There's no stored value there. But if you follow what I just took you through, creating a step that kind of maps in the information of the same data type as your data repeater, and when you try to map it, you'll be able to kind of map that information which you have defaulted, default row.
Gotcha. I'll try that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. I'm sure it'll work, because that's how you kind of allow your data repeater to have some default values when it runs. Okay, let's see if we have any more questions. Okay, these were the I think 2 questions which I saw in the chat, but in the remaining time, are there any questions from anyone? Okay, I don't see any more questions. Any last minute things from you, Mansoor, or we also have Josh on the call?
I don't have any question. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Now, if you don't have further questions, I think we can wrap that up. So what we basically saw in today's Lunch and Learn is how we can report and see the data structures that ran into some issues which were not compiled, because if the data structures are not compiled, we would not be able to use them in the flows. And then we looked at the data repeater part, how we can have the default data rows when somebody actually goes onto the form and starts working on that. That can be done by mapping those default values into the data repeater variable when we are using that in the flow. And we also looked at the JavaScript controls, how we can create them and embed them on decisions forms. So it was a good session. If you have more questions, you can always submit. We will take that in the next sessions also. I think I'll wrap that up with that. Thanks everyone for joining in. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.